Hi, this is Bob Bixby, Executive Director of the Concord Coalition. I'm joined by Tori Gorman, the Policy Director of the Concord Coalition, and we're going to discuss the release of the Social Security and Medicare Trustees reports for 2020. Good morning, Tori.
Good morning, Bob. How are you today?
Pretty good. Well, yesterday the trustees issued their annual report, and the news wasn't good. It usually is not. It showed that both programs have serious financial problems, and this predates the pandemic that we're dealing with now. There are an awful lot of pessimistic reports coming out of Washington and from state budgets, and private firms and household budgets are all showing great uncertainty these days. And the trustees just basically said, look, we have no idea what's going to happen with the economy and how that's going to affect Social Security and Medicare and the trust funds. So we're just not going to guess. We're not going to make speculative assumptions. We're going to give you our view of the future of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds based on the economy as we knew it before the pandemic. And I think that that's a useful thing, because if they had changed all sorts of assumptions, none of us knows what's going to happen. We're in the middle of an enormous crisis. So, with that background, I think it's just important to note the bottom line conclusion is that legislative action is going to be needed to shore up both programs in order to make sure that they're going to be there for future generations. They have substantial costs to the federal budget under current law. And as we begin to come out of the economic problems caused by the pandemic, this is one of the issues that policymakers are going to have to deal with, because unless they do, we're not going to be able to ensure a sound economy over future generations. Tori, what was the big news coming out of the trustees report, primarily for Social Security?
Sure. So I don't think it's a surprise that the Social Security trustees reported out that there's a problem with Social Security. We've known for a while, and we've known that the problem is getting worse every year. I think what was surprising with this year's report is how big of a change there was from last year. The actuarial deficit for the Social Security retirement program jumped 18% over last year. The actuarial deficit now amounts to about 3.14% of taxable payroll, which is just a startling illustration of the growing chasm between projected revenues and benefit promises that we've made. And like I said, that was just a big jump. It jumped almost 0.5% from the prior year. So,
and that really is pardon my gloves here, folks. But that really was a big thing. It sounds like it's not a big deal, like 3% or 2 something, but in actuarial terms, and for people that watch this closely, that's a huge jump.
It is, especially when you think about what the actual deficit, actuarial deficit actually means. It's a way of measuring the gap between projected revenues and benefit promises, and what we would have to do, what lawmakers would have to do to close that gap. So for example, the actuarial deficit for 2020, the 2020 report says that in order to make Social Security retirement programs solvent over the next 75 years, the payroll tax that employees and employers pay, which is right now 12 shared between 12.4%, each pays half, okay? The actuarial deficit is 3.14% of payroll, which means that in order to make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, the payroll tax would have to increase from 12.4% to 15.5% right now. So it's not something that we could delay, all right? In order to make Social Security solvent, the retirement program solvent for the next 75 years, we would have to increase the payroll tax right now to 15.5%. And remember, the payroll tax is something that every worker pays on the first dollar that they've earned. It's not like the income tax where if you earn under a certain amount, you don't pay an income tax. Every worker who earns wage and salary income pays that tax on the first dollar that they earn.
And the alternative would be a significant cut in benefits if you wanted to do it all on the benefit side.
Correct. That's correct. So if you wanted to do this on the benefit side, scheduled benefits would have to be reduced for all current and future beneficiaries by an amount equivalent to approximately 19%. So imagine saying to your grandmother right now, Grandma, we're going to have to cut your Social Security benefit almost 20% in order to make Social Security available for me in the future.
So those are true. I mean, in practice, it would probably be some combination of the two, but it's the gap is getting so big that if you try to maintain that 75-year outlook, which traditionally the trustees try to do to have the trust fund solvent over 75 years, these are very substantial choices. And as you said, it would have to happen immediately, and it's not like a one-time thing. It's that would be adjusting these things permanently.
Exactly. And we know that with each year, as time marches on, that deficit is getting larger and larger and larger. So the tax increases and the benefit cuts that we would need to make, or the program restructuring that we would need to do in order to make the program solvent for future generations, just gets bigger.
Yeah, so delay is not our friend here. And that is one of the problems of dealing with this in the current situation, because obviously there are very substantial immediate concerns, and so it makes dealing with one of these longer term concerns more of a problem. But it means that when we do get around to looking at this, it's probably going to require even larger changes than had we acted sooner, when there are warnings. I mean, the trustees have been warning us about this for years and years and years. And we talk about the trust funds, and that leads to something that I wanted to mention, which is that the trust funds are not necessarily a good indicator of the sustainability of these programs. They indicate money that the government owes to itself. But if you look at it from a cash in, cash out basis, which is how it affects the federal budget and the economy, both programs are running substantial cash flow deficits and have been for quite some time. In Social Security's case, has been since 2010.
Right.
And, the trustees were looking at they gave an example of, the difference between trust fund accounting and budgetary accounting. And they point out that if you look at Medicare and Social Security together, Medicare as a whole and Social Security together, the cash deficit in 2020, this year, is projected to be $465 billion. Now that contributes to the overall federal budget deficit, and that deficit will continue to get larger and larger over time. So the Social Security deficit, I think, is projected to be $73 billion this year, and the rest of that is Medicare. So you can see that, the Medicare program, both part A and part B, and we don't need to get into the distinctions, but for financing purposes, Medicare has a bigger cash flow problem, you might say, because a lot of it is Medicare. A lot of Medicare is financed by an open pipeline to the Treasury, so the more expensive that program gets, the bigger the draw on general revenues.
So I have two comments on that. Number one, I think it's important to remember that when Social Security was first implemented, the idea was that it would always be self-financing. The purpose was to insulate Social Security from political machinations from year to year. So they established a dedicated source of revenue, the payroll tax, and that was supposed to fund 100% of benefits. Now we know that the Social Security program the benefit promises that we've made and the benefits that we're paying out today, the costs that we're paying out today, exceed what we're collecting in terms of payroll tax revenue. So when Social Security is running a deficit, it's competing with other programs that the federal government supports with general revenues from the trust fund. So, you know, we're rapidly heading into a situation where Social Security retirees and their benefits are going to start competing with defense spending and education money and benefits for the poor. And that's exactly what we don't want happen. We want Social Security to be its own little program, self-financed over here, where it just keeps running on a well-funded basis so that we can avoid the political machinations of competing with these other programs. The second thing I wanted to mention has to do with the trust fund. I think people don't really understand what the trust fund is. And so this is a little example that I use in trying to explain to people. Imagine you have a safety deposit box at your local bank, and inside that safety deposit box, you have a $100 bill. At the beginning of the month, you go to your bank and you take that $100 bill out of your safety deposit box because you want to go buy a new outfit or groceries or whatever, but you've got something you want to spend that $100 on. So you take that $100 out, you put it in your pocket, and you write on a little cocktail napkin, "I owe me $100." And you put it into that safety deposit box and you put that back into the bank wall. So you go out, you do your shopping. At the end of the month, your mortgage is due, your rent is due, whatever, your car payment is due, and you're short $100. So what do? You go to the safety deposit box at the bank, you pull out that little cocktail napkin that says, "I owe me $100, and you put it in the envelope to your mortgage lender and you send it in to them. What are they going to do? Your mortgage lender is going to say, "I'm sorry, but we don't accept cocktail napkins as a form of payment. You need to convert this cocktail napkin into cash and send us cash." So that's exactly what's going on with the Social Security Trust Fund. We have all these cocktail napkins stashed away. So fine, we pull out this cocktail napkin. We can't send these cocktail napkins to Social Security retirees. They're like, "I can't spend this cocktail napkin at the Piggly Wiggly down at the corner. Okay, I need you to send me, Uncle Sam, I need you to send me cash so that I can pay my electric bill, my food bill, pay for my prescription medicines, etc." So the federal government's got to figure out some way to take these little cocktail napkins and convert them into cash. And the way they do that is raise taxes or cut spending elsewhere.
So that's a good way of putting it. I mean, the bonds in the trust fund will be honored, but the way of honoring them is turning them into cash, and the way the Treasury Department has to do that is, as you said, to borrow from the public or raise taxes or cut other spending. So having ample assets in the trust funds, in Social Security's case 2035 and Medicare Part A to 2026, doesn't mean that we have that long to take action. You've got to take action really much earlier because the bonds are just really a claim on general revenues, as you said, making it competing against something else. And even if you go by trust fund accounting, you don't have that much. That doesn't buy you much more time anyway, because it's only 6 years for Medicare Part A, and it's only 15 years for Social Security. And so the question then is, what would happen if Congress did nothing and said, well, we need to wait. We can wait until the trust funds run dry. Well, what would happen then is the programs don't have authority to pay benefits if they don't have anything in the trust fund. They can only pay what's coming in from the payroll tax. And in a hypothetical situation like that, by 2035, Social Security would have to have an immediate across the board 21% benefit cut. And with Medicare, it would be in the Part A section, a 10% cut as soon as 2026. Now, nobody thinks that that's a hypothetical that would actually happen, but it begs the question, what would prevent it from happening? Legislative action has to take place. Tori, with all of the money that's being spent now very freely without any concern about the deficit, I think Congress has already passed about $2.5 trillion worth of spending on the pandemic, on top of a $1 trillion deficit that we already had projected, and who knows how big the deficit might go this year. I guess that may raise the question in some people's mind: why do we worry about having to pay for shortfalls in Social Security and Medicare? Why don't we just do what we're doing for the pandemic and deficit finance them to whatever extent we need?
Sure. I think it's a great question. And the biggest difference is that the pandemic response is a one-time, short-term financial commitment, uh, whereas Social Security is a program that, we're hoping, lasts in perpetuity, not only for today's seniors, but tomorrow's seniors and even beyond. There's a big difference between financing $2-3 trillion worth of deficit for a single year versus doing it every year in perpetuity. I mean, I don't think that the domestic economy, the value of the dollar, could sustain that kind of deficit spending on an annual basis. I think the dollar would collapse, hyperinflation would ensue, and it's just a recipe for financial disaster. And moreover, I know that organizations like Concord Coalition, once this pandemic is over, are going to be encouraging lawmakers to address the run-up in the deficit as a result of the pandemic and try and pay that down.
Yeah, well, we will, just for the sustainability of the economy. And that's such a key point, is that a one-time huge expenditure in the face of what we're trying to do in fighting the pandemic is so much different than an embedded structural deficit between programs that are supposed to last in perpetuity. And that's really the key point.
Sure. I mean, if you look at it just from an individual perspective, if your hot water heater breaks and you're short of cash, it's okay to go put the hot water heater fix on your credit card and then pay it down over the next couple of months. What's not appropriate is to put your monthly mortgage on the credit card.
Yeah, and the other thing about deficit financing in perpetuity, these programs, is they are meant to be, to a certain extent anyway, self-financing, particularly with Social Security. Let's leave Medicare aside because it's financed in a little bit different way. But with Social Security, it is designed to be self-financing. So if you just say, well, let's just have general revenues fund more and more of it, it becomes more and more just like any other program in the federal budget. And it would lose its cherished status as a as a social insurance program.
Sure. One of the foundations of Social Security is its universality. That's what makes it so strange. So strong. Excuse me. Everybody benefits when it works properly. Everybody benefits from it. Current seniors, today's workers who become tomorrow's seniors. When the financings get out of whack and you upset that delicate balance between today's workers and tomorrow's beneficiaries, the sort of universal appeal of Social Security starts to erode, and that's dangerous.
And I just want to end with this thought too, that when people like us talk about the importance of Social Security reform, I think sometimes people think that we're making a criticism of Social Security or Medicare. That's not the case. These are vital programs. These programs have done a lot to improve the life standard of living of the elderly, and we want them to be preserved. The problem is that under current tax rates and benefit commitments, they can't be. I mean, there's just a fundamental gap there, and it's important to tell the truth about these programs because that's the only way you can bring about the reforms that will allow them to continue to perform their vital function into the future.
Exactly.
Well, this is Bob Bixby, and for Tori Gorman, stay safe, have a good day, and we'll see you with the next issue brief.
See you, Bob.
Bye.